All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. So it's my pleasure to welcome Roger Ward, who's coming to us from Georgetown College. Professor Ward is the editor-in-chief of the Pluralist, the main journal for the Society for the Advancement of American Philosophy. He is also the author of books such as Conversion in American Philosophy and Peirce and Religion. And today he's going to talk to us about Dewey. So please give your warm welcome to Roger.
Thank you. This is like coming home, kind of, with Doug and Randy. I should say that Randy is largely responsible for my job at the Pluralist. I was the book review editor for the newsletter for the American Philosophy Group with Pat Dooley. And when they merged that or took over the Pluralist, Randy asked me to be the book review editor. And then within a year, he said, and next year you'll be the editor, which I have been now, I think, for about 12 years. So can you believe it?
Far too long.
Far too long.
Well, no, I mean, not because it's not going well, but because it's too much work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. But Sunny's been very, very helpful. She's our assistant editor, and been really grateful for her work. So my primary job here today is actually furniture delivery. I brought a chair, and the story on the chair is that an alumnus of Georgetown College, Bill Jones, got his undergraduate degree at Georgetown College in philosophy. We went on to Columbia and worked with Herbert Snyder. And so when Herbert Snyder uh, was retiring, he gave my friend Bill Jones a chair that he'd received from Herman Randall, and that was the chair that he'd worked in through in his office chair. So it came Randall, Schneider, Jones, and to Georgetown. And so I just needed a place to put it. So I contacted the archives here. They said, sure, let's bring it over. And so this talk is really a pretext for furniture delivery. So glad to be here. So my topic today is Dewey, meliorism, and the task of community. You can see that this is very much a work in progress. And so I'm going to talk hopefully about 20 minutes, and then we can have a conversation. That'll be most helpful, I think. So the context is that have been working for a year or so on a book on community, American philosophy and community. The tentative title is Community and the Salvation of American Philosophy. Not presumptuous, just like if we can get community straight, maybe we'll have a place for American philosophy in the future. And given the political context of the last couple of days, I think more pertinent than ever. Um, if you are anywhere in the space that I am, it's been a desperately confusing, alarming, um, stunning turn of events. So here we are. So I begin with thinking about the two strands of community thinking in American philosophy, and I know I'm talking to people who know a whole lot more about this than I do with Doug and Randy. But Peirce introduces community in his work, um, and follows that line through. And I think Royce builds obviously from Peirce's notion of community and inquiry. But also in Jane Addams, a different sense of community emerges with her focus on um, the family as the center of a community that then can be expanded and through amelioration engaged in resolving problems for basic life issues. So these are the two strains. So community, the ideal of community, Peirce, Royce, that way. Um, meliorism and community, Addams, Dewey, Du Bois. So that's the basic trunk I'm kind of exploring. So one of the things that fascinated me when I started digging into more about Jane Addams was the role of her visit to the catacombs in Rome on her second European trip. Some of you know this story a little bit. That she visited the catacombs. She bought a pin that had the Chi-Rho symbol, the early Christian symbol, Chi-Rho, and her fascination with the structure of the community that was underground and yet focused on the needs of other people as this force of coherence, but also of being able to engage needs around them. After that, she went to London with Sarah Anderson, who was an accountant at Rockford, her friend, and so Sarah Anderson, and she went to Toynbee Hall. That's where she saw this Christian socialism in action at Toynbee Hall that motivated her to come back to Chicago and start the Hull House. So there's a definite kind of religious background to Addams' approach. I have here a text by Farrar, who was a canon of Westminster, who had a book published right around the time that Addams was in London called Amelioration of the World. So this notion of amelioration was in the air, so to speak. Um, um, I had a longer quotation. I took that out. This is Christian central responsibility, following the example of Jesus, both in diminishing the miseries of mankind by abstaining from the aggravation of them to make man's life happier than it is. So, as Addams began her work in Chicago, her first goal was merely to expand the range of culture to people, especially who weren't able to access the culture that she had experienced. And I think she began to see that there was a coherence in those migrant communities uh, that she understood had its own kind of coherence and power. And she writes in, I think this is 1908, about social amelioration must come about certainly through the efforts of many people who are moved thereto by the compunction and stirring of the individual conscience. The individual conscience, however, will respond to the special challenge and will heed the call only in proportion as the individual is able to see the condition and intelligently understand the need. Therefore, careful investigation and mutual discussion is perhaps the first step in securing the legal enactment and civic amelioration of obvious social needs. Um, in the same text, she describes social amelioration with the following sort of stacking. So the household knows the needs of its children and therefore can infer the needs of all children. But then the third step is to then examine the warrants of the practices in the society that are affecting all children. So it begins in the household, it expands to a more universal understanding of the need, but then it shifts to an understanding or a critical appraisal and shaping of the social warrant that guides action. So this is the kind of work that Addams was thinking. The other thing I noticed in Addams is that she retains from her religious background this term of righteousness. And this shows up all through her work. It just stands out now that I've kind of been paying more attention to it. So, for example, she gets us from Tolstoy, first of all. There's a little quotation here that she has on an introduction that she wrote to, I think it was a Cambridge edition of Tolstoy's What Then Must Be Done in 1934. She wrote this introduction. This is the concluding line of her introduction. It may be no clearer to us than it was to him, Tolstoy, that a righteous life cannot be lived in a society that is not righteous. It was clearer to him than it has been to any others, save to a small handful of shining souls, that the true man can attempt nothing less, and that society can be made righteous in no other way. And so, picking up on that idea of righteousness, if you look through Democracy and Social Ethics, the very first chapter, she says, it's well to remind ourselves from time to time that ethics is another word for righteousness, that for which many men and women of every generation have hungered and thirsted, and without which life becomes meaningless. And then the social aspect of this righteousness gets reflected at the end of the second chapter, where she is talking about charitable work. And the concluding figure in that chapter is this one from Micah 6:8. The Hebrew prophet made three requirements from those who would join the great forward procession led by Jehovah, to love mercy, and at the same time to do justly, is a difficult task. It may be that the combination of the two can never be attained, save as we fulfill still the third requirement, to walk humbly with God, which may mean to walk for many dreary miles beside the lowliest of his creatures, with the pangs and throes to which poor human understanding is subjected whenever it attempts to comprehend the meaning of life. I could go on the righteousness theme. I will mention that she does in Newer Ideals of Peace refer to the call to righteousness as a means of avoiding dogmatism, even in the pursuit of moral ends. So this is becomes a very flexible term for Addams throughout her work. And if you read her speech at Carnegie Hall on the abolition of war, righteousness all the way through that. So it's another key there. She really has a difference with Tolstoy on the war thing. Maybe I'll talk about. So now I'm going to shift to Dewey. So I think Dewey, of course, picks up this idea of meliorism through his contact with Addams. And according to Louise Knight, who's done a lot of biography work on Addams, Dewey was visiting Addams and the Hull House pretty early in her time there. So even when he was writing in like 1891 and 2, he had already been in contact with Jane Addams. And so some of this language that reflects Tolstoy, I think, is also somehow influenced by Addams. So here's something from the early works. Community appears in Dewey's 1891 essays as the realization of community as a moral end. So I won't read that whole big section. Well, I'm going to skip down to the bottom of the page. That big quote at the bottom, starting about 8 lines up from the bottom. And thus the temper of the individual, so far as he is what he should be, is a spiritual act which may be described either as self-abasement or self-exaltation towards an infinite spirit, which is really the only ideal, the attitude of man at his highest and completest, could still be only that of self-abasement before an ideal of holiness. And yet this attitude must be one in which the heart is lifted up to God, in which the whole inner man goes forth after an ideal of personal holiness. I think he's quoting there. And then if you look on the following page, the same discussion that gives conclusions regarding the ideal are shown to answer the problems regarding the basis and nature of obligation and the nature of goodness. In the second part, it is shown that the realization of personality both demands and occasions society or the community of those having common interests and purpose, regulating themselves by common laws, implicit, conventional, or reflective, and recognizing common rights. So the moral obligation of community begins to emerge, I think, in Dewey through this interaction. Another place where Dewey early begins talking about community is the outline of a critical theory of ethics. And I have a little bit of an abstract there. I'm going to start reading down where the italics start. This faith is generally analyzed no further. It is left as faith in one's calling or in humanity. But what is meant is just this. In the performing of such special service as each is capable of, there is to be found not only the satisfaction of self, but also the satisfaction of the entire moral order, the furthering of the community in which one lives. All moral conduct is based upon such a faith, and moral theory must recognize this as the postulate upon which it rests. In calling it a postulate, we do not mean that it is a postulate which our theory makes or must make in order to be a theory, but that through analysis, theory finds that moral practice makes this postulate, and that with its reality, the reality and value of conduct are bound up. So you can kind of get the little force there. And then here's this block thing is Dewey's own emphasis. In the realization of individuality, there is found also the needed realization of some community of persons, of which the individual is a member. And conversely, the agent who duly satisfies the community in which he shares, by that same conduct satisfies himself. right? So I'm going to skip down to the bottom point there, number 2 on bottom of page 3. Christianity and democracy. I'm not sure who all's read that text, but he deals with Christianity and then deals with democracy and kind of weds the two. Good reference to Tolstoy right at the beginning. Every religion has its source in the social, intellectual life of a community or race. Jesus did not start a religion, but attests to a revelation. And so the community becomes a site for divine revelation in a way. He uses some very interesting incarnational language here. Um, Let me see if I can get to that. That's on the top of 4. Somehow still does my heart good to read Dewey quoting scripture. I don't know why. Man's own action, his own life movement is the only organ for he has for receiving and appropriating truth. It is man's social organization which always has set the form and sound the keynote to the understanding of Christianity. The means by which revelation is carried on is democracy, the community of ideas and interests through community of action, that the incarnation of God and man becomes a living and present thing. And as democracy comes to consciousness itself, we will confront the question of the wider realization of truth. So you're seeing the emphasis now of community as the incarnation of a place where new things can be discovered or things can be revealed. 3 and 4 here kind of just bridges up a little bit into later Dewey works. In education and community, like in school and society, Dewey adopts Jane Addams' notion of the community for some group that then spreads out to a larger group. And then to comparing the warrants for the society. But he never acknowledges Addams in any of that notion. So he's adopting her framework without really citing her work. But in education and experience, the educational community becomes much more of an instrumental kind of tool. It becomes the core through which individuals are shaped. More than the revelational model that he had earlier, or that lever to get to the warrant of society. It becomes the core organizing principle for the shaping of conduct of individuals. Meliorism then appears pretty explicitly in Reconstruction and Philosophy. Of course, this was later. This is 1925, 20.
Reconstruction philosophy is 20.
Go ahead. Specific conditions which exist at one moment, be they comparatively bad or comparatively good, in any event may be bettered. Man is under moral obligation to develop his most advanced standards and ideals as to use conscientiously those which he already possesses. Progress arises by treating or resolving ills, but only the person wearing the shoe, in one of his favorite metaphors, only the person wearing the shoe knows where it pinches. The value of institutions is the extent to which they educate every individual into the full stature of his or her possibility, the contribution they make to the all-around growth of every member of society. And then creative democracy, he reiterates the same kind of principle. Amicable cooperation and inquiry generate the conditions for the moral realization of democracy by empowering individuals to reconstruct their experience. So here's the critical move. So I'm talking about community and calling here on bottom of page 4. Jim Campbell, in his book, The Community Reconstruct, which is a really nice book, examines one of the issues that Campbell raises, which is that Dewey's thinking about community doesn't ever have the kind of success he anticipated. To discover why Dewey's method of social reconstruction has not been more successful, and to determine what aspects of it should be and might be revived, it is necessary to explore the fundamental assumptions that underlie Dewey's understanding of our social existence. This is a conclusion that Campbell reaches about looking for why Dewey's notion of community hasn't gotten the traction that he thought it would have. Second point there is about the public and its problems. The functioning of publics in comparison to the looked for transition to the great community. If you read that text, you know, the great community always seems to be right around the river bend. Not sure how to get there, hoping it shows up. But recognizing the absence of the public in the context of modern economy. Still, the advocacy for habit and action remain compelling. And the sense of being drawn into this work and sort of existentially faced with the purpose here shows up in Experience in Nature. This from Experience in Nature, fidelity to the nature to which we belong, he says, demands that we cherish our desires and ideals until we have converted them into intelligence. When we have used our thought to its utmost and have thrown into the moving, unbalanced balance of things our puny strength, we know that though the universe slay us, still we may trust, for our lot is one with whatever is good in existence. And I have on the top of the next page a reference to Job 13:15, which Dewey is obviously echoing there. Though God slay me, yet will I trust in him, but I will maintain my own ways before him, indicating some continuing overlap between a philosophical understanding of community and an existential spiritual commitment revealed in action. So that's sort of my push here, is to kind of read the the movement of Dewey's community, yet still retaining this existential kind of spiritual force to it. Here's my analysis, top of that last page. Dewey enacts, I think, an inversion of the generative force of community in Addams. The integrity of the community for Addams enables the extension and formalization of the community worker. Addams does not propose to replace the integrity of the form of life, she finds. For Dewey, the educating community becomes a new core, shaping the rest of life and institutions. And in this way, the educational community is instrumentalized. It becomes a tool for changing social practice, not a recognition of the force of belonging so much as a means for employing social force. Here's my question. How do we develop from Dewey to provoke a content of community sufficient for reordering our loves, of leaving the deadening influence of materialism or pro forma democracy for the practices of serving neighbor, pursuing moral and natural goods, and inspiring the spiritual approach that can progress the seculum toward its appearing telos of increase in the ordered richness of experience. And the question that really got me going was, how do we discover the content of community sufficient for reordering loves? This is the task that I'm talking about. The task of developing a community of calling is an absence, an opening in Dewey's democratic community model. We cannot socially engineer our way out of brokenness, but we can engineer against it or toward healing of some kind. These kinds of commitment-based actions can be revealed better by some comparisons. I've got three here at the end, just to kind of hopefully prompt your imagination. Bimral Ambedkar, some of you all read Scott Stroud's work on Ambedkar, who used Deweyan principles to kind of structure the Constitution of India. And then right before not too long before he died, he enacted this very public conversion to Buddhism and led thousands of people in a conversion to Buddhism, because he realized that remaining within the Hindu tradition with its caste system was never going to be remediated. He could never remediate the Hindu caste system away from that separation between individuals. So in order to constitute the next kind of community necessary for progress, Ambedkar was adopting Buddhism as that means. Also with Du Bois, we all know Du Bois and his interaction with Jane Addams, and went to Philadelphia, worked on the Philadelphia Negro with Elizabeth Stanton. Am that the right name? Yeah. And so she kind of inculcated Du Bois into the sociological practices familiar from Hull House. Um, and his force was to elevate the dignity of his community. He Interestingly, there's a great text by Gary Dorian on Du Bois and his reaction or his integration with the Black social gospel leaders of the time. He was very careful how he developed leaders who he knew would go into the church. He would preach at the churches and adopt the language, um, but it was clear that he had a different kind of you know purpose in mind. So he was kind of piggybacking on the Black social gospel in order to elevate the the dignity of the race as he understood it, which I know is complicated. Um, the main threat was capitalistic ownership as an outgrowth of white domination. So that's why he, of course, moved toward communism in his later years. And then also Martin Luther King Jr. The force of democracy through participation is supported by a dedication to a called community, according again to another book by Gary Dorian, Breaking White Supremacy. The Baptists, surprisingly, were able to support a Gandhi-like figure that the Black social gospel was looking for to coalesce action by calling and commitment. One of the things that King was able to do was to bridge the culture gap within the Black community in Montgomery. Um, the members of the Church of Dexter Avenue, where he was preaching, were all professors at Alabama State University, and they were middle class Blacks, and they didn't want to hang out with the lower class Blacks who were feeling the brunt of the segregation. So what King had to do was to integrate his own community so that they could see that their social existence was connected to the social existence of the members of these other less educated Baptist churches. No oppressed group, he says, can be liberated without integrating, or integrate without being liberated, because power has to be shared in society. Um, Dorian makes a point that King was committed to nonviolent action, even though his lieutenants were saying it's time we start thinking about violence to get our message out. Um, King would never make that step. He held on to that conviction that nonviolent persuasion and action was the only way to possibly reconcile the community. So the task of community leads me to think about a couple of things here. Just checking my time. Um, so I think come on in. You're welcome. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the characteristics of the community of calling that I'm looking for in this text is one that privileges love, perhaps over or in relationship to loyalty. I know that Royce's loyalty to a community of memory has attraction. Um, I'm not sure that that has the forward progress that a community oriented by love would have. So I'm thinking more love than loyalty, or at least love in relationship to loyalty. I think it would also have to be a community that attends to physical, emotional, environmental needs of the the whoever counts themselves as members, and then whoever is connected to that membership. I think the ingredient of, and this is what Addams really discovered, the ingredient of looking for community among a community of local needs and issues was central to any possibility of constructing something that could be ideologically powerful. And I think the third characteristic of a community of calling would be the pursuit of some fallible ideal or fallible idealism that enables kind of self-controlled action to discover the realization of a shared ideal. Um, and the fallibilistic character means it can't be held or controlled or owned by any person or group. Um, so those are my ideas, and I'm anxious to hear what you all have to say.
Okay, so,
Yeah, please.
Hi. Thank you for your presentation. I
Yeah.
really
Tell me
enjoyed
your name.
it. Danny
Danny.
Fink.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm one of the GAs in the center.
Okay.
I noticed in terms of the examples that you put forth that it's a kind of common theme amongst all of them, despite their different focuses,
Yeah.
was that not only did they have some connection to Dewey's work,
Yeah.
they took it upon themselves to be their own leader.
Yeah.
And incorporated some aspect of religiosity
Right.
into their understanding of community.
Right. Except
Like-
Du Bois, probably not so much Du Bois, but
thing is
yeah.
even going into a religious space and adopting its language
Yeah.
is incorporating some level
True.
of religiosity.
Right.
So that has me wondering if, because, especially because Dewey's idea of experience in relation to spiritualities is something that he hasn't even settled past his later works.
Right.
It's something he continuously was working through and with. Some in his early works, he seemed really not as rigid about it.
Mhm.
In his later works, he seemed a little bit more, it's more of a problem.
Right.
And that doesn't seem to be the case with all the people who
Yeah.
take it up, which I think naturally begs the question, how are these people understanding democracy and experience in relation to religion?
Yeah.
As it concerns
That's a great
reordering
question.
loves.
How do you answer it?
I would say, I think, uh, I'm going to be exploring this in more detail with the upcoming project, from a different angle. But I think how they're answering it is they understand religiosity as central to community building.
Yeah.
In the sense of it's part of what it means to reorder the loves.
Yeah.
Is speaking to the pathos.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but what does that mean? It's a very different thing of doing than in philosophy where we speak strictly logos.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So.
And those who are familiar with my work over the years, this is kind of a constant theme with me, because of this is a tradition I'm raised in. I'm hypersensitive to, nuanced references in text like the one by Dewey there.
Mhm.
And I don't think Dewey ever fully escapes the connection in his own thought between sort of the ideal of the possible community and something of his own religious tradition.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, but I think we don't do our tradition a good service by truncating that connection. And yet we're very uncomfortable by doing anything more than just referencing it or noticing it. If, if to propose that advancing the role of American philosophy and society would somehow be connected to or friendly with a religious tradition would probably not get a lot of support from the Society for the Advancement of American Philosophy, right?
Mhm.
But I do think that there's an element there, and I think this is where I think we need to recognize there's an absence, that in order to respond to the needs of the whole person or the whole community, I think we have to deal with religion at some point and in some constructive way.
And I think that ties in with the point made about what Addams said about dogmatism.
Correct, exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's how do we approach it without being
Right.
dogmatic? I think that's the next question.
I agree. Thank you.
Mhm.
Doug.
This is kind of convoluted follow-up.
Yeah.
It wasn't meant to be that way, but so Bob Marley and Gloria Anzaldúa both have experiential motivations for including the things you're talking
Right.
about in different ways. And you raised the question, and it's interesting because we do it in a historical philosophical context.
Yeah.
So I want to know, I mean, you asked in a way that there's an undertone there about why does Dewey's not work?
Yeah.
And to me, that's a question of motivation.
Right.
And I would say the same for both Du Bois. I mean, Du Bois, I think,
Right.
gets depressed over
Yeah,
lack of motivation.
Right. Right.
So if we go back to Philo and the post-Socratics, and Philo has, I'm just going to paraphrase,
Yeah.
right? We all know that if humans acted with kindness, love, and grace, and so forth, the world would be fine.
Right.
They don't do it.
Right.
So I'm going to seek my internal amelioration and perfection.
Right.
Saint Ignatius, we can go through Christian monks
it.
up and down.
Right.
And then you come to somebody like George Santayana, all the same story. I can't, there's a basic Stoic, Cynic version of this. I can't control any of this. Why should I be motivated to try to fix these other humans when they're all foolish? And I think about that in the contemporary context.
Yes.
With Martin Luther King, was motivated and motivating. Right. So when I was younger, there was motivation if you're 17 to 20 years old to act, to be engaged. I think the problems currently in the US are the worst I've ever seen. They're worse than 68, they're worse than Nixon, they're worse than Watergate, they're worse than all of that, they're worse than Vietnam.
Yeah.
And I see no motivation.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, looking at this question of community, what would motivate us to engage in democratic changes?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Spiritual exercises, which is the way somebody like Pierre Hadot will put it.
Right.
It's a spiritual exercise not tied to a dogma.
Right.
But something that motivates the human towards community.
Yeah.
You have the calling version.
Yeah.
But that's only gonna hit some people.
Right. Right.
So where's the motivation?
So,
'Cause I'm
yeah, and I agree
confused.
that's the question, right? How do you, what's the source of motivation? And here's what I'm taking from Addams, and between Addams and Dewey, was Addams was able to recognize the integrating coherence of the communities that she met, and then could elevate them without disturbing them. And I think that's where I would, if we're going to have any kind of a community that emerges from whatever we have now, it's going to have to somehow develop from the integrated understanding of those 19, 20-year-old kids who voted for Trump, to see that there's something beyond just thinking for themselves. And I think it's possible. But I think it takes a lot of work. I mean, this is my life at Georgetown, because we're in a deep, kind of like you're in a deep red state, and trying to elevate the vision of students who've been integrated into this kind of Christian nationalist view all through their upbringing and their current, their entrance into the political realm, and trying to work on the edges to provoke them to think further than just their own power. I don't know.
I go on ready to say, like, we forget we're one nation under God, we're one nation gone under, we're tearing ourselves up apart inside already.
Yeah. Yeah, but even that way of phrasing it, that was an adoption, 1952,
Right.
the one nation under God kind of thing. So even recognizing that was sort of a move to kind of force, some sort of a stamp.
I mean, I'm for freedom of religion, but yeah.
So I don't know if I didn't answer your question.
Well, no, I mean, I think it's an open question.
Yeah, it is an
I-
open
I think,
question.
You have some motivators.
Yeah.
Tolstoy was a motivator.
Yeah.
Certainly King was.
Yeah.
Malcolm X in a different way.
Yeah.
But it seems like generating those people is a difficult task.
Right.
The ones with the calling.
Yeah. 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 Sunny.
Yes, I was thinking, kind of similar along the lines of Danny talking about like a common faith,
Mhm.
when later Dewey is like, well, maybe we need something that's like, I don't think this is the word he uses, I can't remember, like supernatural, like that we all feel the like awe of it,
Right.
but without the,
He wanted the militancy, but without the,
I think it's
Right.
supernatural.
yeah.
super, yeah,
it's
right.
like that.
Not
So,
super.
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
super, okay,
Yeah.
so, and I was thinking of like, speaking of these people who are voting this way, right? A community of common interests and purposes.
Yeah.
So I think people come together over common beliefs. So
Right.
for me, an atheist,
Right.
right? Like, would this community be right for me? How can we make it right for all of us?
Right.
Maybe that supernatural is the thing, because I still feel this ethics,
Right.
this love.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Audre Lorde.
Yeah.
And this idea that difference is our strength. And when we have a common life,
Yes.
we insulate and we become dogmatic.
Yeah.
When we have a common purpose, now that's different.
Right. Yeah.
So, and then all of our differences of our experiences and our lives and our beliefs become power together. So, I guess that was, my question became a statement. It didn't.
Yeah, that's good. That's helpful. Yeah.
So my question was like,
No, and this,
how do we fit
I think you're
together?
right.
Yeah.
And that's why the forms that I was talking about, the love, attention to need, and sort of a fallibilistic ideal would probably, could be mapped onto something like Aubrey Lord's.
Yeah, so where could we all in the same space as we're doing right now?
Yeah.
Those who are religious can feel that love and the attention to needs.
Right.
And then those who are ethical, if you
Right.
wanted to put it that way,
Yeah.
can also feel that love and needs, right?
Yeah.
From a different, different.
So there's
perhaps.
a great book on Tolstoy and Jane Addams by Robert Craycraft.
Okay.
Now he lives in Chicago, but he's not at University of Chicago. And the title is Two Shining Souls. And he points out toward the end of that text that Addams, even though she kind of separated herself from her Christian roots, when she went to Hull House, she maintained a lot of the language, and she still worked with churches until sometime in the 1900s. But when she was doing her post-war work in Europe, she partnered with Quaker organizations. And then she kind of manufactured, so to speak, a connection to Quaker ideology through her father, even though there's no connection that he was ever Quaker or related to a Quaker, but she attributes him as having had some Quaker sensibilities. But Quaker would be, the Quaker tradition would include being able to work with non-believers or anybody who was engaged in the same purposeful task. And so there was a pretty clear connection to her there.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Yeah. Please.
Right.
Tell me your name.
This is Harrison Jackson. Yeah, so a second year PhD student here.
Cool.
This is a bit of a shift in gears,
Yeah.
but I'm especially interested in Addams' notion of amelioration as rooted in the household.
Yeah.
And that reminded me that the original Greek term for economics was oikonomia, which is household management.
Yeah.
And so kind of making that connection, I'm wondering if there's a sense where we need to also adjust our economic values as well, in order to, I guess, use something that Dewey would probably be in favor of, this like instrumentalizing economics to serve the community, rather than viewing it as an end in itself.
Yeah.
And I know that's something that you haven't discussed, but I'm wondering if that would be
I think that's right. I mean, he especially in Reconstruction of philosophy, he's very adamant about the what he calls it, the brutalization of materialism, and his critique of utilitarian ethics. But you can't abstract economics from the purpose of a shared common life.
Makes sense.
Right. So I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, piece.
Go.
Oh, sorry.
No, I just cool.
I was gonna say, to follow up with what you were saying, that made me think of a piece written by Gago within the past 5 years titled "What is Essential Labor?" commenting on what was deemed essential labor during the pandemic,
Oh, yeah.
and how the pandemic brought to light the unpaid and unseen labor that helped society function.
Absolutely.
Just another connection. I mean, Dewey's also influenced by James and by Thoreau through James and the rest of that tradition. To see economy as an economy about life, rather than an economy about finance. And this goes back to the Greek version. I mean, it really is about the economy of the household in the sense of how you live all together.
Right.
It'd be an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah. You've been too quiet, making me nervous.
Well, I mean, you've given us a lot to think about here. I mean, I'm thinking about the current problems. I decided a long time ago that I would try to throw my energies into local things, because our idea of community comes from our experience of community, and therefore it's highly varied depending on what the experiences are. And the only community I really know is the one that I live in.
That's right.
And so if I refuse to give way to abstractions about community, then the organic, concrete community that I live in, which by the way, doesn't look nearly as bad as it is on the news.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
agree.
are we ripping ourselves to shreds? Well, not around here,
Right.
and not in Georgetown, Kentucky.
No.
You come down my way, come down south.
Yeah.
You don't have to go far out of Carbondale.
But here's the thing, I think it's possible to have community on differing bases.
Right.
I mean, I spend plenty of time in places that would be regarded as benighted, from a Carbondale point of view. But what I don't see in such places is people ripping each other to shreds.
Right.
And so if we could turn off the media and the television, we'd probably be just fine. In the sense that I think that for the most part, Americans in the present day know how to live together.
I think you're right.
And so the problem is a problem at the level of ideas and abstractions more than it is a concrete problem on the ground.
Yeah.
I do not feel like, so Murfreesboro is 83% Republican. I don't feel unwelcome there at all.
Right.
Of course, I'm also not a Democrat. They know what to make of me, but I'm accepted. But I mean, to me, if we can hold at arm's length what I guess I might call the mid. So I'm not worried about philosophers.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about academia. I'm not worried about the discussions about theories of community.
Right.
I think those are perfectly healthy. It's this mid-level of our culture where we think we know what we aren't really experiencing.
Right.
And that's where we're tearing each other apart,
Correct.
not with
Yep.
what we actually are
Yeah.
experiencing.
Yeah.
So localism, and that's very Jane Addams.
Very Jane Addams.
You
Yeah.
make a
Yeah.
difference where you are.
And
You
try
to
here's
learn where
yeah.
you are.
So here's the thing that really struck me about Jane Addams, and I don't know how much time we got, but okay, we got a couple minutes. Man, that she really screwed herself on that thing about war, but she knew exactly what she was doing, and she did it anyway. And I mean, she had to know that the way she was conflicting with the move to militarism in the United States was going to put her at odds with everybody. I mean, even Mary, what was her, Rosette Smith, right? Was on the other side. I mean, it was a household issue between them. And yet she stuck with this, the war there was no place for war in the continuing modeling of community. And she was willing to follow that path, even knowing that was going to spell the end of Hull House. And she did it.
Honestly, that idea of no place for war is being resurfaced in contemporary cultural theory.
Yeah.
I think this idea for peace.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And this was King also, right? I mean, everybody was pushing him to, go with the violence because this is what was getting headlines and this is how you get your position out. And he was, wouldn't do it. So I think there's real.
It's still mid-level culture.
Well,
that's what I would say.
Yeah.
If you're non-violent in your daily practice.
Yeah.
And you solve 99.9% of your problems non-violently.
Yeah.
Then it strikes me that it doesn't make that much difference what you say theoretically. And if the culture responds against you because you're a public figure, then that's a different level.
Yeah.
I mean, and so to me, what you're saying about Jane Addams, and it applies to King and many other people, it happens when you cease being local.
Yeah.
In some sense, and so learning how to embrace your influence as it spreads out, that's going to be a real challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of people who would just say, you know what, I don't want to be an influencer.
Yeah.
Because it's going to kill my ability to talk to my neighbors about things. And so anyway, that mid-level is where the problem is, and it's a real problem. I mean, it's a concrete problem. It's not just an abstract problem.
Yeah.
But it comes from the fact that we think we know what we don't know, and we think we have experience of what we don't have experience of.
Right. Yeah.
I have very, very different experience because I work construction, and when you're out there in that world, you're either in or you're out. You're on the bus or you're off the bus. You can't break in. So my other question, so I think that I think acting locally,
Play in bars.
sure, and we,
People like
and we
this.
accommodate,
That's
we
true.
don't say on stage.
Yeah, we don't talk
Right.
about stuff like that.
Exactly, that's my point, right? And you can't do it in the workplace.
I'd say half the bars we play in, they'd kill us if they knew our
Right.
politics.
So, but, so I agree with you about acting locally. My experience is different. But the question I have is, it's very clear to me that Trump world
Yep.
thinks it's a community.
Yep.
That's how they act when I'm working with them.
Absolutely.
That's how they
Yep.
act in the bars that I play in.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
they think they're a community that's well welded.
Absolutely.
They have a variety of conflicting ideals.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to matter to them.
No.
So are they an ameliorative community? They think they are.
Could they be the ground for an ameliorative community? Yes. And this is the real nail in the foot, right? You know, to accept that there is something like an integral notion of community among, you know, what we think of as the opposite,
The deplorable.
the deplorables, the basket of deplorables. That's hard. I mean, but you know, it's my family, it's your family, you know, it's crazy.
That's why I say,
Yeah.
is it a community?
Well, they are ameliorating the threat to patriarchy.
There's a, I forget where this is, but there's a place where Dewey asks, you know, is like a gang of bandits, the right kind of community to like, you know, he describes the way in which they fit the model he's been
Well, Royce does that too.
articulating.
Yeah.
And then he says, you know, the problem is that as soon as you get outside the band, right,
Yeah.
there are all of these relationships that tend to narrow the opportunities and experiences of that group, right? There are all kinds of you know, the way in which their ideals become narrowed and pinched by their antagonistic larger relationships, right? That prevent that from becoming the ground of the right kind of community.
Yeah.
Maybe
Well-
then there's a sense that we need stronger relations between communities.
Yeah.
And not just, because that's something with internet discourse where people get very kind of drawn into these abstract communities that they find online, but then they ignore their own physical community, their neighborhood.
Right.
I will say that in response that kind of connects all of this, there is a nonprofit organization that was made in 2022 by a former MAGA writer called Leaving MAGA, because he left in 2022, felt this need to try to mend the harms he did. And it's a way for people to leave MAGA but still have community.
Huh.
Because it's
What's it called?
It's Leaving MAGA.
Leaving MAGA.
Yeah, it's a nonprofit. I learned about it a couple of days ago through the Philip DeFranco show because, but I think your comments about MAGA and Trumpism being an ameliorative community is a right assessment, but I think the reason why it was created is because there was this existing lack within the abstractness of the U.S. national politics of what community and representation is.
Yeah.
So
I'm too much of a cynic for any of that, and I appreciate, and I've long appreciated your commitments. I mean, Bob Marley tried this, getting two people on stage, and it didn't work.
Right.
I you know, I'm sort of back to the Greek model, the Plato's model. If you've got a dysfunctional community, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And it really has to go rather than be revived or remodeled or anything else.
Say some more. What do you mean?
Well, so if the company of thieves.
Yeah.
Or in the company of this case where you've got, it's pro-abortion, it's pro-freedom, it's pro-guns, it's all these things, right? You can't kill a fetus, but you can kill kids in school.
Right.
It's a broken system, it's a broken picture.
Right.
And it eventually, I think, will come to crash around the kinds of things that Dewey thought it would.
Right.
Because it's not a coherent
Exactly.
view.
Right.
But until that goes, right, they're a very tyrannical,
Absolutely.
powerful
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
And so you know, history ebbs and flows, but I do think there has to be a serious active pushback.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Whether that's violence or nonviolence, it's
Right.
gotta be something
Right.
that's addressing what's
Right.
happening.
Yeah, and I guess I would probably go with King and Addams on that point, that the only real possibility of making anything like a community that could incorporate those who've left MAGA with whatever comes after that would have to be through some kind of nonviolent kind of
And
persuasion.
I think the picture of that with Netanyahu,
Yeah,
his situation, there's no coming back from that.
no,
I think that's your point.
right, yeah,
The violent one is just gonna create more
absolutely,
antagonism.
yeah.
Interesting.
If we have time. On page 3.
Yep.
In all caps, you write, in the realization of individuality, there is found, is that your quote?
No, that's Dewey.
That's Dewey.
Yeah.
Okay, I wondered,
Yeah.
I didn't see I just probably needed to read ahead.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I just wanted to comment on individuality. I do a lot of work on that because I'm really interested in the history of individualism from like the Reformation, when
Yeah.
we started being able to read the Bible for ourselves,
Right.
be the arbiters of our own truth, and make all of these decisions on our own.
Yeah.
And I feel like this history is important now because I think the white straight male, right, had access to individuality in
Yeah.
a way that nobody else did.
Right.
They had access to that kind of individual isolation, and there was less community
Absolutely.
for that group of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Whereas the rest of us who were marginalized in some way had to find community out of like, that's how you survive. And so now we're in a time in which that group feels ostracized.
Yeah.
They feel threatened.
Yeah.
And so finding this community, the MAGA community, is their first sense of, I am an individual, but now I have other individuals. So I think that that's a play here.
Absolutely. Yep.
I
I think that's
and it's interesting.
one of the reasons that Trump appealed to Hispanic males,
I agree, 100%.
because I think they were, you know, this is one way to finally break the separation, the whatever race or language separation they were feeling, to become real Americans.
It's also misogyny.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah.
I'd say, I think
Yeah.
the patriarchy
Yeah, yeah.
behind this.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah.
You, for this idea of what you were talking about of this lack of community, Terrence McMullen in his book Habits of Whiteness, which has a second edition, that's exactly the idea he talked about.
Yeah.
It's the Jordan Peterson phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, like 20 years ago, when we were talking about community, we were talking about the sort of bowling alone problem.
Right.
Right. I mean, the absence of community, the
Right.
feeling of isolation. And if these have been the ways we've solved it, right? Jordan Peterson's online community, the MAGA movement. I think that says something interesting about building community.
Yeah.
Right. And the way in which the inheritors of Dewey have failed to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that,
Yeah,
but I think it's troubling. And
It is. Yeah.
I mean, I think Dewey, for all the problems in the conception of the great community, right? I mean, I think he's right that's where we have to head, right?
Yeah.
You can't, I mean, local is not enough because we only act locally by cutting off our imagination and inquiry into the consequences of our actions.
And this is where Addams disagrees with that, because acting locally, in fact, gives the ground for how we would expand those principles into the moral principles of the larger community. That's what I really find that interesting by Addams, and I think that's a real difference from Dewey.
Right. I mean, Dewey's emphasis on continuity,
Right.
Leads them to explore the ways in which there are these ramifications, right? There are these connections that, and it's, 100 years after Dewey wrote about it, it's so much worse, right? I mean,
Right.
there's no action that we take on a daily basis almost that doesn't involve an entire global system of some
Exactly.
kind.
Yeah.
And she was also working with white people,
Yes,
Europeans.
absolutely.
And I mean, there's no story there about what happened to the black community or
That's
the
right.
Native American community who've been basically murdered.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
what I was trying to get at is
Mhm.
the story she tells is only, that expansion is only gonna work when there's some kind of continuity.
exactly.
And I think Dewey was
Yeah.
certainly onto
I
that.
think-
Also in the public and its province, which is, to me, sort of the down-to-earth version of all of this. Is that what effect do you have?
Right.
And how does that translate back to what comes back to you?
What we get, one of the things we get in the public and its problems is the need for communication, broader levels of communication.
And
And-
genuine communication,
Genuine
not Rush Limbaugh,
Right.
right? Because that you call in and only the ones who are ditto heads get in.
Right.
So the real communication, which of course Dewey was thinking about.
Well, Doug, what do you say? I mean, I'm continuous with white straight males. Why am I not afraid of all this, all these immigrants and these women and, I mean, why am I not afraid of that, but others are?
I think,
I'm the same as them.
no, you're not.
But I'm,
No, you're not. Socrates answers that pretty quickly, you think.
You think?
You don't think.
It's just a fear tactic.
The very idea.
so I'm not continuous with them.
Oh, you're right. And not a big P philosopher, but a little P. You think about your life.
Yeah.
And most people do not.
And they never will.
No,
That's
see,
your
that's
I
Philo's point of view.
think they,
And that's
Yeah.
George, what's his name? Saint-Étienne,
Oh,
the
yeah.
same way, right? They're not gonna think, right? And the readers of Plato like Strauss, the Straussians, take the same view,
right.
right? So,
Yeah.
when you read their version of the Republic, it's, these people are never gonna get it.
Mm.
And the game's over. So
Right.
you find your ways to either control the whole or go off into the woods.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
do your thing.
You said people getting murdered. As a white guy, I think the white male, we're the most evil people on the planet Earth. Killed the Indians, we killed the blacks, we shoot the Jews, and even in modern day, genocide's going on right now. I mean, over in Israel, Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
I mean,
Case could be.
Well, as Malcolm X said, there's really
Yeah.
almost nothing awful in the world that's ever happened that wasn't done by white men.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
It's not entirely true, but it was rhetoric, but gosh, last 500 years or so.
I mean, like modern day, like, you hear like, for example, a truck driver killed in North Carolina, the woman killed in Springfield, just, I mean, she obviously didn't do anything, shot by a white cop just because she was on the pot of water. Like, there's no sense in that. And like, just recently, in New York, street performer got killed by a Marine for nothing.
So the question is, how do we talk, I say we, it's the one woman in the room. But do we as people who all believe in this purpose, right? That's, why I can be here and feel comfortable and safe, right? Bring other white men into this community and not a community where they feel like they need to oppress the threat and I say that meaning that I want to work with striped white men and love them and give them space. But how do we do that in a way that also gives the rest of us space and empowers the rest of us? I don't know.
Yeah.
I've been wondering that for a long, long time.
Me too.
Well, there is the brotherhood of white straight men in the sense that somebody who happens to be one like me, I can move in that space, and I'm not as long as I accommodate. To
Right.
use Doug's
Yeah,
word,
yeah.
As long as I accommodate, I'm safe and could make a tiny difference by just guiding things ever so slightly in the constructive direction. But the instant I'm identified as an ally of women, or an ally of blacks, or an ally of anybody except for the Brotherhood, right? Then, I have no influence.
Here, and I know we're trying to wrap up. I'm really curious what the future of the MAGA Republican Party is post Donald Trump,
when he's gone.
because it incorporates now black males, a lot of women, Hispanic males. When you try to put all those folks together, they have different aims, and if it's not worshiping one individual, then I think that could be an interesting little story of fragmentation coming down the pike. But confusion to the Pope is what they used to toast, right?
Confusion to the Pope.
Yeah, this was what the British would always they would toast, or confusion to the Pope. Yeah.
And part of this, right, is the people, I mean, it goes back to the people you know,
Yeah.
and then the people you think you know but don't know, right?
Yeah.
I mean, my mother was from the Deep South. She was, unapologetic racist her entire life.
Yeah.
And she had friends of color, right? And, and of course, she had a whole rhetoric about them being the good ones.
Yeah.
Which if you lived in those kind of communities, you've heard that phrase,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so there's like Randy was saying, there's the abstractions, right, that say one thing. There's the personal experiences that say the other thing.
Yeah.
And there's the inability,
Yeah.
sort of lack of imagination that allows you to keep the two disconnected.
Yeah.
All right. We haven't solved the problem.
No, we haven't.
But there's lots of work to do. Please join us in thanking Roger Ward.